Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. So I figured I'd go ahead and hop on one of the FIDE World Cup games. I was kind of like leaning towards Magnus Carlsen, so I figured I'd go ahead and cover one of his games. So I'm taking this one from round 3. This is game 1, and it is Magnus Carlsen versus Aryan Tari. So as always, my people in the Philippines, I will say mabuhay, magandang umaga, magandang hapon. Let me see. Kamusta na? Appreciate you guys very much. Not getting too deep. Appreciate you guys very much. Messiah Kong Kitty King Moody. Appreciate you very much. Any of my people that are coming from Norway, I will say God Morgan and Tusen Tak. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by, taking a look at my stuff. Hopefully I do your countrymen some justice on this one. It's actually a really interesting game. It has a couple different concepts coming up in there. So if you guys are ready to go, let's see what we got for this game. So we got C4, E6, we have G3. So we actually have the English opening. It is the Agincourt defense. So as you can kind of see, like we have some C4s, so it's not the usual like D4 that I'll probably show on my page, because I do cover Wesley So a lot. So we kind of have like a little King's Indians, mixture kind of going on. So we do see D5, and then we see Bishop to G2. Now we do in the game see Pawn takes C4, but if we back up here, people that watch my channel a lot, I mean, they will notice the kind of like the familiarity with the structure. So if you actually see Knight to F6 and then you see D4, we actually have a Catalan here. So it is a lot more similar to like the types of games that we have seen on my channel. Not necessarily the Catalans, but as you guys notice, the structure is very similar. So that's something I just wanted to point out. So anybody who does watch my stuff, they will see the resemblance in the position. But we do see pawn to C4, pawn takes C4. We see queen to A4. This is a very common way to try to get your pawn back. Because you're not going to be covering with knight to C6. You're going to have some issues possibly after bishop here, because you're going to be, kind of having to defend your B7 pawn and stuff like that. So usually you just see C6. Another thing with this too is you're trying to like take away this C6 square from the knight. This is the knight's like optimum square to go to. So if you can remove the possibility from black, you've kind of given them a little bit of an issue with their development. So we do see queen takes C4, we see C5, and then we actually see the novelty of the game already, because C5 is a very, very rare move in this position. So we do see B3 in this position. As recent as 2 years ago, we've actually seen knight to F3 twice. So that's like the more common move that you see after C5. But like I said, we do see B3. We see knight to F6. We got bishop to B2. So as you can see, white has some really good bishops going on here. They're pretty much slicing through the position pretty nice. They got a little X going on. So we do see bishop to E7. We definitely want to get castled pretty quickly, with these bishops pointing all over the place. So we do see knight to F3. We got knight to C6. And that's kind of like where that C5 move comes in, because you really do want to put your knight on C6. You don't want to have to, put it on a D7 and stuff like that, So we see castles by white, castles by black. Knight comes to E5, and now we have a lot of pressure on this C6 point. We have the knight and the bishop both going in that particular direction. So something has to kind of give. It doesn't have to give, but it's usually better to just give. So the knight takes on E5. We see bishop takes E5. We see knight back to D7. And then we just see bishop back to B2. Like, we definitely do not want to trade our bishops in this position, because you guys can see how open the position is. You definitely want these bishops in this position. So we do see rook to B8. Fianchettoing the bishop for white usually gives black kind of like some issues trying to get their queen side developed. So rook to B8 just kind of helps out with that a little bit, because, of course, you can't just push B6 right here, because you're just going to be dropping your rook. So we're not doing that. So we do see knight to C3. We see bishop to F6. We see rook A to B1. We always want to make sure that we cover our bases with this bishop, because it is actually undefended. So we don't want to like move the knight and accidentally drop the bishop. And so we see B6 now. We see B4. Bishop comes to B7. We see bishop takes B7. Rook takes B7. Pawn takes c5, knight takes c5, and then we do have bishop to a3. And there's a very real threat. I mean, it's gonna be defended against, but you know, we definitely don't want to see any bishop takes you know, c5s, because then you will be hanging your rook, or just giving away the knight for free. So we do see rook over to c7. And I mean, this is basically what I tell you guys all the time. It's always nice to put a rook across from the queen. So, you know, it's a very logical move to do. So we do see rook f to d1. We see rook over to e8. We got knight to b5, trying to get a tempo on that rook. We see rook over to d7. We see bishop takes c5, pawn takes c5, and then we see queen over to a4. And we're not necessarily like, you know, attacking this pawn, but we do see queen to a8 in this position. Now, it's actually legitimate to go rook takes d2 also. That was definitely an alternate move that you can make. But you have to make sure that you know, calculate and you do the right take back and the right follow-up moves to rook takes d2. Because you will see knight to d6, and you are giving a double attack on this rook. And so, you know, you need to check with rook takes d1, and then rook takes d1. So you're not really going to have any issues because, you know, you can just unpin your queen and you're good to go. Or move the rook. And then the queen, the bishop is defending the queen, so you're good to go. But you definitely want to be careful after knight to d6 that you don't actually go rook back to d6. Because then you're actually going to be hanging your rook. Because rook will take d6. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to deflect this queen away from the defense of this rook. So you have just dropped a complete exchange, and that's not something that you want to do. So like I said, we did see queen to a8, just making sure that we just kind of do away with all of that. So we do see d3, we see h5, rook d to c1, because that rook on d1 has done its job. It basically was just protecting the pawn. So now that the pawn is defended by this one, you know, the rook has a little bit more freedom to move. So we do see rook over to c8, we see knight down to a3. See rook to d4, knight comes to c4. Nice little spot for it. Of course, you know, blocking that rook as well. So we do see h4. We see queen up to b5. We see queen down to d5. Queen to b7 because we're trying to trade in the position that we have. So we do see rook d8. Queen takes d5. Pawn takes d5, knocking the knight away. We do see knight to e3. And we have a rook over to a4. And, you know, you have a couple different options in the position. What we actually saw in the game was rook to c2, just defending the pawn. But, you know, you also had the ability to take here, which is what we're actually going to see it coming up pretty soon. So the rook comes to c2. We see h3. And h3 is, I mean, it can be kind of nifty because, you know, you are taking the only flight square away from the king. So you definitely now have some back rank mate issues. So you want to be very careful with how you're playing. The king comes over to f1, trying to get some air. So we do see bishop to d4. We see knight to f5, bishop to f6, knight back down to e3, bishop to d4. Don't worry, we are not drawing this position. We just repeated a couple of times. It might have been a way for both players to try to, you know, get a little bit of time on their clocks. The knight comes back to f5, and then we do see bishop back to f6. And then it is now that we see rook takes c5. Rook takes a2. We have knight back down to e3. We see a5. Knight takes d5. Bishop down to d4, getting a tempo on the rook. We do see rook c to b5, and then we see a4. And this, unfortunately, is a game-losing blunder by Tari. So if you want to go ahead and pause the video and see what move Magnus Carlsen plays. And don't feel bad if you don't get it, because there's actually a lot of like chess understanding and knowledge behind the move. It kind of seems like it doesn't really do a lot, but you know, once it's explained, you'll see exactly why this is such a game-ending move. So go ahead and do so right now. All right, cool. So, I mean, I'm trying to think of like what other moves would be in the position. Maybe like knight to f4, maybe knight down to b4, maybe knight up to c7. Knight to e7. Like, they all pretty much kind of seem like they are pretty similar. I mean, of course you do see this check here, but you know, does it really amount to anything? Well, the answer is like absolutely yes. So the move that Magnus Carlsen played, and Aryan Tari actually resigned after this move once he saw what was going on, because there's literally no way out of losing an entire piece after this move. So if you found this move, you actually at least were able to find, like, you know, the check move. You know, pretty much like when you're looking for like moves, whether it's tactics or in your own games, you're going to be looking for checks usually first. But this move is a lot deeper, like I said, than some people might realize, because knight comes to e7 with check. And it might kind of seem like you can kind of sidestep it and it's not that big of an issue. But the problem is there is actually a checkmate pattern in the position if you make two moves. If you move your king over here to h8 or you move your king over here to h7, it is actually mate in one, because this is what's called Anastasia's mate. The knight is checking the king, and the knight is actually covering both of these squares. So once this king moves here or here, it is completely trapped. So either one of those moves, you're going to be placing checkmate on the king with rook to h5. And it doesn't matter which one you go to. Like you see, this rook is checking on this file, but the flight squares are taken away by the knight. So that is a nice little Anastasia's mate. So that is why you cannot go that way. So your only move is to actually go king over to f8. But unfortunately, this completely drops your bishop 100%. And the reason is because after knight to c6, you are forking the bishop and the rook. And also, this knight is doing a very good job of protecting the only flight square that the king has. So you absolutely cannot move this rook off of this back rank, because you are going to be dropping checkmate in 2. So you're forced to move the rook to one of these squares. But unfortunately, in doing so, you're going to be dropping your bishop. I'll show you what that looks like. So basically, I mean, you're going to be, obviously, if you have to move to one of these squares here, you know, you're going to just be dropping your bishop for completely free. But if you don't, if you try to hold on to this bishop with moving to any square, you're going to be looking at check here. And then the only thing you can do is move your rook in the way, and that's going to be checkmate. So as you guys can see, there are so many mates after knight coming to e7. So if you did find knight to e7, congratulations. If you saw knight to e7 and you were able to calculate knight to c6 and the Anastasia's mate and stuff like that, then, I mean, you're pretty good. I mean, that's a lot to really be calculating. So I'm not sure when Aryan Tari noticed that he was pretty much getting mated. But he did push this a4 move, not probably thinking there was anything wrong with it, but maybe he didn't take enough time to notice that he was in that type of a checkmate box and pattern. But you know, that's pretty disappointing to know that it seems like you have so many moves as black. You have a lot of space as black, but you literally have nowhere to go. So I thought that was a really interesting, that's a really crazy ending to it. It's very instructive, because I mean, I think that there are definitely some people out there who are familiar with the Anastasia's mate, but to figure out that king to f8 loses because you have knight to c6, I think that was definitely much deeper, and that's Magnus Carlsen, man. You know, the world champion. So I appreciate you guys very much. For all my people in the Philippines, maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng king my video. Appreciate you guys. Mabuting pagbati. And Makita Tayo Mamaya, and anybody who is coming from Norway, I will say Tusen Tak. Thank you very much for watching my stuff, and I will see you guys next time.